Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Levitt. I'm a former CIFSAN director at FDA and a longtime member of the board of directors of the FDA Alumni Association. I'll be your moderator today. I want to just take a moment and recognize that we are in a very tough time for both those still at FDA and most especially those who've recently had to leave FDA during the rather unusual reduction in force process. I myself, you might have seen a post I did on LinkedIn entitled, "Working at FDA is a Noble Calling." I've always felt that. I know everybody on this call feels the same. I just want to take a moment to express both my own and the association's appreciation for all you have done, everybody, for your entire time at the FDA, regardless whether it's long or short. But we also now need to pivot to next steps. And that's what today is about. So we're moving from appreciation to what do you have to do next in terms of finding life after FDA. Because at the same time, everybody you see on the screen is proof, living proof there is life after FDA. So you do have something to look forward to. For those not familiar, the FDA Alumni Association is the official network of former and current FDA employees, having been established over 20 years ago. We are dedicated to, quote, serving those who served. And in that vein, we have recently, one, posted a message of support for FDA staff in our newsletters and on our website. We have posted signs outside of White Oak. We got a lot of positive feedback on those. And I'm told that some went up today outside CIFSAN, and people are also working to get signs outside CVM. Thanks to Nancy Myers and her sign brigade for taking care of that. We have organized a series of webinars. This is the first one devoted to career paths after FDA. Today, we're focusing on food, veterinary medicine, and tobacco sectors. Tomorrow is the second one from 3:30 to 5, focusing on medical product areas to be moderated by Lisa Bernstein. And Thursday is the third one from noon to 1 o'clock, focusing on practical tips for job hunting for drugs and biologic counsel, with Elizabeth Youngman serving as the moderator. Also tomorrow, it's a busy week, that the association is also organizing a mixer at 5:30 at a place called McGinty's. I'm told so far 95 people have signed up. So apparently tomorrow at 5:30, that is the place to be. You can continue to sign up through our website or through the various LinkedIn outreach that we've used. We have more things in the planning stages. We're also looking at a survey to find out what needs are most urgent for you. So please speak up. We hope that those listening will consider joining our association if you're not already. Due to the current special circumstances facing ex-FDAers, we're offering you the option to waive the first year's dues. So no excuses. Just go to fdaaa.org and look for the new member button. As we like to say, once an FDAer, always an FDAer. Okay. Couple caveats before we start the official program. One, today we are offering general advice on how to approach your post-FDA employment. This is not a job fair. No one today is recruiting you on this call. That has to be separate. Two, if you are still at the FDA and considering a possible move, be sure to consult with the FDA Ethics Office so you know what the rules are and you don't by mistake run afoul of them. And third, if you've recently left the FDA, you may also be a good idea to check with the Ethics Office to see if there are any post-employment restrictions, particularly if you were a senior, had a senior position at the agency. Okay, time to start. We have prepared today's program based on 7 questions. We have, as you will see, an all-star panel and they will introduce themselves in the course of answering the first question momentarily. But we've designated a leadoff speaker for each question, and we'll then take it from there. Unfortunately, we cannot take live questions, but we have looked at those that were submitted and have tried to incorporate them as much as possible. One final point, this session is being recorded and it will be available for consultation on our website. Thank you all. Time to get started. I'll take a deep breath. Okay, cleansing breath, as we like to say. Question number 1. In just a minute or two, please introduce yourself. Tell us what your first post-FDA job was and what led you to that job. We're starting with Stuart Pate.
Thank you, Joe. I'm really delighted to participate in this webinar today and join with the other panelists in providing what advice and counsel where we can. Joe, before I introduce myself, I really want to pick up on your comment about once an FDA or always an FDAer. Once you're employed by FDA, you've joined a community, and thereafter, former FDA folks will seek to help you in any way they can. So my advice to everyone would be, please don't be shy in asking for help. We're all here to provide help. So I'm currently head the FDA practice at Polsinelli, which is a Kansas City-based law firm with over 1,000 lawyers. I served in the general counsel's office from 1974 to 1978. And from 78 to 79, I worked in the commissioner's office for FDA Commissioner Don Kennedy, in a position that later became the executive assistant position. For most of my time at FDA, I gave no thought to leaving. And then after Don Kennedy went back to Stanford in late 1979, I began to think about maybe I should do something different. I had no idea what that was. I began to think about leaving. I reached out to Peter Hutt, who had been the first chief counsel I worked for. And I said to Peter, I think I want to leave and go to a law firm, but for reasons that aren't clear to me to this day, I told Peter I wanted to go to a law firm that didn't have an FDA practice. And that's exactly what I did. And the first 6 months was quite a shock. I came from the commissioner's office where my day was filled. If I did nothing, my day was full of meetings. And I came to Park Lawn early and I stayed late just to keep up. And thankfully, I'm an early riser, so I could pull into the office at 6:30, 7 o'clock and have an hour before the day was a blur. For the first 6 months at Patton Boggs, which was the firm I wound up going to, I would periodically pick up the phone on my desk to make sure it had a dial tone, because there was no evidence whatsoever that it worked. It was, some days were brutal. I had lots of doubts about whether I had made the right call in leaving the agency. Maybe I wasn't cut out for the private sector. But I hung in and I worked diligently. And I would say that I always had faith in myself. And I think that was the most important thing when I came out. I would have periodic doubts, but at the end of the day, I would have faith in myself. And that was important and ultimately led me to Patton Boggs and then now to my current firm.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Caitlin Boone.
Hi, everyone. I echo everything that you heard from Stu and Joe. I was in the Human Foods Program for about 12 years, most recently serving as Associate Commissioner for Food Policy and Response. I took a little bit of time off to decompress after COVID and everything going on. And then about 2 years ago, I joined Mars Incorporated, where I currently serve as Director of Public Affairs, focused on health and nutrition policy. And I work in human food, pet food, and veterinary care issues. So it's been a happy place for me, having spent time working with both CIFSAN and CVM in the past, to get to work on that same variety of issues. I was attracted to this position because it gave me an opportunity to combine my interest in advancing public policy while also using a technical skill set. I remember when I was looking for a job, I also went to a lot of people I trusted and asked for recommendations of if I were to go to the private sector, where would you recommend? And Mars kept coming up on the list as being a company that had a great reputation for food safety. And being in the Washington area, it also had the added benefit of being able to sit at a global headquarters without having to relocate. So it's been a great transition thus far, and looking forward to talking to you all more about the process.
Okay. Thank you very much, Caitlin. Let's move on to Don Zink in the consulting sector.
Yes, afternoon, everybody. When I left FDA in 2015, I was a senior science advisor at CIFSAN, and I had the luxury of thinking about what I might do after FDA for at least several months before I left FDA. And that's a good thing. The more you think about something, the better. I wound up joining a laboratory testing and consulting firm. My role in it is purely consulting. I'm responsible for everything food and a few consumer products, and mainly address regulatory compliance, which is something, a subject FDA teaches you very well, and there's a market for that in the private sector. I think the main reason I wanted to do something after FDA is I just couldn't see myself retired, which is a disease that continues to haunt me, and I'm trying to cure myself of that, but without a lot of success so far. I think what led me to the job was that I like something new every day, and there's one thing about consulting is that once the phone starts ringing, then it's always something a little bit different. So for me, it was a learning opportunity to keep learning, and it was an opportunity to solve problems and apply some of the skills I developed at FDA in the private sector. I'll talk later about the choices I had and the path that led me here, but I think that pretty much sums up, my take on question one, Joe.
Okay, thank you, Don. So we've gone from law firm to food company, the consulting group. Now we're going to shift to the nonprofit sector and turn to Peter Laurie.
Thank you, Joe. So I'm Peter Laurie. I'm a physician, sometimes a researcher. I came to FDA from Public Citizen, which, as many of you know, is a public interest group, often a critic of FDA, although not so much in the food sphere. Came to FDA skeptical in some ways of how it would all turn out, but I came to absolutely love it. And it was as good a job as I've ever had. And I was there for 8 years, eventually became associate commissioner, worked under the yoke of Jeremy for a while. And then honestly, what happened was rather straightforward. President Trump came in the first time, and quite honestly, I set it out for a bit. And what I discovered was that I was reasonably high up in the organization, doing things not only in food, but people lost interest in my perspective on things, and meetings that I would otherwise I would have been invited to, that I really knew something about. I no longer was invited to that. So I said, well, okay, if that's the case, I'm not here to sit in a corner. I'm here to make a difference in this world. going to look for another place to do that. And around about that time, position of executive director at Center for Science of the Public Interest, another public interest group, opened up. Applied for that, and they had the bad judgment to choose me. So that's how it happened. And I'll talk a little bit more about how the skills were transferable from one to the next later on in this. That's my story.
Well, thank you very much. Also, a good example that, sometimes the job hunt, if not forced upon you, is, shall we say, encouraged upon you.
Yeah.
All right, let's turn now to someone I think everybody on the screen knows. Susan Main was, I have to do this, Susan. Susan Main was the illustrious director of CIFSAN. Now, of course, because of reorganizations, the final director of CIFSAN for over 8 years. So Susan, take it away.
Thanks, Joe. And just to everybody listening, and I want to echo my empathy for the situation you're in, and we'll do what we can to help support you. So a few comments about the academic world. I was CIFSAN director for 8.5 years. I retired from the federal government in 2023. And then I actually returned back to the institution where I spent 30 years of my career, and that is the Yale School of Public Health. And I'm currently an adjunct faculty member at the Yale School of Public Health. And so I thought a few comments, it was kind of obvious why I went back there, given that I'd spent 30 years there, but I want to spend a few moments talking about my career and some things that I hope will be helpful to you. The first thing is be open to any opportunity that may present itself, as long as it's consistent with your values and your passions. And I know many people always try to plan out their career path. I've learned that it's not always possible or even desirable necessarily to plan out in advance every step of your career. So my career started when my spouse took a position in the state of Connecticut, and I needed to accompany him as a trailing spouse, and I didn't have a job. I had just finished my PhD. So I was like, I'll find something. So I found a postdoctoral fellowship in cancer epidemiology, which is really different than my PhD, which is in nutritional biochemistry. But I found something and said, well, this could be interesting. Let's see how this goes. And it wasn't planned at all, but it actually ended up being a really impactful decision for me, which really set the stage for my next 30 years at the Yale School of Public Health. Likewise, I had no intention of moving to the federal government. I was very happily employed at Yale. I held an endowed chair, but I was recruited to the FDA. And when I heard about the opportunities at the FDA and the potential to have impact, I really couldn't turn it down. And so I made that decision to take a very different turn with my career. And I honestly tell everyone it's the best decision I could have made. And so I say that simply because, people try to plan things out, but sometimes opportunities happen, and be open to those opportunities. They may end up being the best possible decisions that you could have made in the future. So that's my first bit of advice, and we'll get into some other areas of advice going forward.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. I'm going to use the moderator's prerogative for a minute and pick up on Susan's point on being open to things you hadn't thought about. I actually ended up at the FDA at a law school completely by mistake. I wanted to work in the mental health area. I had a partial psychology background. And I looked up in the government manual what was then HEW. And in the Office of General Counsel, there were several divisions, and mental health at that time was under the public health division. But I was in Boston. I had to buy my own plane ticket. So I said, I'm not going down for one interview. Where else can I apply? So I look up and I circled everything with health. And the first was FDA. The second was healthcare financing, which is now CMS. The third was public health. I wrote them in, paying no attention to the fact that I copied them out of the manual in the order they appeared. The recipients thought that meant FDA was my first choice and sent me out to FDA first. And seeing a young, energetic office, I never left. But again, I was happily open to something I was not expecting to be open to. So at this time, especially with so many people looking out there, keep a wide purview. All right. With that, let's move along. Jeremy Sharp, also policy consulting background, more in the policy area than regulatory area, I think. Jeremy.
Thanks, Joe. And thanks for having me. And I'm like everyone else here, I'm eager to be of service to any of you who need help finding a new landing place in this time of change. So I'm very sympathetic to that because I was at the FDA in the tail end of the Obama administration and departed on January 20th, 2017, when I had at least a few months warning, which is different from I think many people who are looking right now. But I knew my job was over when the election happened because I was a political appointee and probably a big pain in the butt to many people on this call and elsewhere. And I will say, even though I knew that my job was essentially a temporary job, and I knew that I would be, and I sort of had some visions of what I was going to do, I had a long search. It took me about a year to find the place that I wanted to be, and I was lucky enough to be in a position that I could be, that my wife was well employed and could support us during that time. But it took me a while, and it was partly because I kept barking up the wrong tree, frankly. And I'll talk more about that later. But where I ended up was at Waxman Strategies, which is former Congressman Henry Waxman's firm. And as Joe alluded to, a lot of my work is helping foundations, nonprofits, some for-profit organizations, and other organizations try to navigate health policy in Washington, D.C. And particularly what I'm most often asked for is help thinking about how would the FDA think about things? How can we help the FDA think about things the way we do? And there's a lot of call for that work out there, even in moments like this. So I'll leave the rest of that to the rest of the call later.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. And if I'm right, I think you're maybe the only person on this panel that also works in the tobacco space. Okay, good. We can maybe come back to that later as needed. Okay, finally, let's turn, we're back now to a law firm, but more in the veterinary medicine space. Deepti Kulkarni.
Thanks so much, Joe. I want to start first by thanking the FDA Alumni Association for organizing this webinar and the other events that you mentioned at the outset, Joe. I also want to echo the other panelists in extending my empathy and support for the many talented and wonderful people that work and have worked within FDA. I'm currently a partner in the food, drug, and device practice at Covington and Burling. I advise clients, as Joe mentioned, on matters involving animal products and FDA oversight of foods, which generally translates to products that are primarily regulated by what we now call the Human Foods Program, what we previously called CivSAN, and the Center for Veterinary Medicine, CVM. Before joining private practice, I worked in FDA's Office of Chief Counsel for 6 years, from 2009 to 2015. And while in OCC, I advised the agency on a similar range of matters in which I currently continue to advise outside the agency. Regarding why I left or what brought me to private practice, being an OCC lawyer was truly a dream job for me. If you would have asked me what I wanted to do in law school, over 20 years ago, I would have told you I wanted to be a lawyer in the Office of Chief Counsel at FDA. And I enjoyed every single minute of it. I left OCC for reasons entirely unrelated to FDA. My primary goals were to expand my perspective, further deepen my understanding of the regulated industry, and quite frankly, to more quickly pay off student loans. I had intended to return to the government at some point, but found myself really deeply enjoying private practice and being able to assist clients in navigating the agency and meeting their commercial goals, including complying with FDA regulations. And so I think I'll echo what others said at the outset, to keep an open mind and perspective, because you will be surprised by the opportunities that present themselves and how much you might enjoy some of them.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now turn to question number 2. We consciously constructed this panel of people that represented different sectors that you could look for, whether it's law, whether it's consulting, whether it's academia or a company or a nonprofit. And so in this question, we're asking, what was your thinking behind a particular role in the private sector, be it a law firm, company, consultancy, nonprofit, or other, that you chose to pursue? Don, we're going to start with Don Zink, who's in the consulting sector for regulatory consulting.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I had the benefit of several months to think about this, and I'm sorry that not all of you have that same opportunity. But in thinking about it, before FDA, I had worked in both academia and the food industry. I knew I didn't want to work in the food industry again. I had previously been in charge of product safety for Nestle, which was the world's largest food company at that time. It was great preparation working for a huge bureaucratic multicultural organization, because once you do, they're all about the same. But I just thought, yeah, going back to the food industry, it would be kind of old hat. So that left me with academia or other. And it turned out I had an opportunity to go be Dean of Agriculture at a large state university. Actually, I knew a lot about that because I had previously served on the board of directors of a large university, so I knew something about their finances and inner workings and politics. And it occurred to me that if I took that job as dean, that it was going to be a full-time fundraising job, and I'd be wearing a suit 6 days a week. And the other problem is that the outgoing dean was beloved by everybody, and you're always much better off following an idiot than somebody who's beloved. So all of the signs indicated to me that that's probably not the direction I should go. And then I had I had two other predominantly laboratory testing organizations approach me, and one of them had a large consulting operation in contrast to the other. And I liked that idea. I liked the idea of maybe helping solve problems. And I've always seen my role, whether it was at FDA or now with this consulting firm, is the same. I'm trying to make food and consumer products safer. I'm trying to help people comply with the regulations. And most people, and nearly everyone I deal with, wants to comply with the regulations. They don't always want to do it on my terms or think they can afford to, but that's the challenge of the job. So that was really, I think I'd sum it up by saying you have to figure out how you know what you do best, or how you can be most successful, and try to play to that strength. And if you don't know how you can be, what you do best, then that's probably the first thing you have to figure out. But I haven't regretted my decision at all, and if I can ever figure out how to retire completely, I'm going to do that and nothing else. But I've enjoyed this because of the extreme variety of it. One day I might be dealing with somebody's problem with a peanut roaster, and the next day I'm dealing with somebody with some contaminated baby shampoo. It's highly varied. But I do the same sorts of things. I render scientific opinions based on the literature, and I interpret regulations for people. I try to put it in terms they can understand. So that's really what got me to where I am now.
Okay, thank you, Don. Two quick follow-ups. One, you're a microbiologist, if people don't know that. But your kind of work would also be suitable for someone that came from FDA's field organization. Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
So people could be thinking about that if there's anybody from OII on the call, or formerly OII, or formerly ORA. Second question, your company has a large laboratory component. You don't work in that, I know, but can you say anything briefly for anybody on the call who is from the FDA labs?
Yeah, we presently operate about 140 laboratories globally. We're in 8 countries. And these in the commercial lab business, it's it's really a tough dog eat dog, low price, fast turnaround kind of business. And so these little labs are like little factories. However, we also employ about 80 research scientists in Seattle who have research and development roles. So I think there's quite an opportunity in the industry and the testing sector if you're willing to relocate and if you're willing to take on a supervisory kind of role.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's turn it back to Susan Main. Susan, let me tee this up for you. Where do you see opportunities for former FDAers in the academic setting? And in answering that, as someone who has also mentored graduate students as they entered careers in academia, government, industry, NGOs, et cetera, what advice, general advice you have for our attendees?
Thanks, Joe, for that. So a couple of things is you have an immense amount of knowledge coming out of a regulatory agency that is really lacking in the academic setting. And like you've heard others, I wasn't really ready to retire either. So what I really wanted to do was transfer some of that regulatory knowledge back to the academic setting and mentoring. And the other thing I really wanted to do, having departed as CIFSAN director, is tell FDA's story. It's often hard when you've got constraints upon you and how we communicate at the FDA, but being on the outside, I can really tell FDA's story. So that's part of the reason I went to the academic setting. But a couple of things like congressional relations. Before we had all the hearings that blew up with many of the academic institutions, I was so shocked that Yale didn't have a congressional relations team. And my dean had to go testify in front of Congress. And I'm like, you need some help with this, And these are areas that universities, I think, are now starting to recognize they could use some help in how to navigate Washington. Universities need that help. If you're near a university, maybe you could talk to them about those opportunities. The regulatory process. Many schools of public health are offering regulatory affairs certificates to their graduates who find it very lucrative when they get jobs in the pharmaceutical industry, other places. So if you're near a school of public health, or if you're interested in approaching them, find out if they're offering a regulatory affairs certificate, and maybe you could help build a program. I'm working with Yale right now on reinvigorating their regulatory affairs certificate program. In terms of core competencies in schools of public health, every accredited school of public health is required to have 5 core competencies: biostatistics, epidemiology, environmental health, including toxicology, health policy and management, and social and behavioral sciences. We had all of those in CIFSAN. And so depending on what area you're in, there may be opportunities to interface with some of the schools of public health. Maybe potentially offer to teach a course if that's something you're interested in an academic setting. I did that when I was a research faculty member at Yale. I offered, even though I wasn't teaching faculty at the time, to do a course because it was something I was interested in. I taught the first course in nutrition at the Yale School of Public Health. And that helped me get a leg up when a tenure track position became available. So there's just so many opportunities. Also, for those of you who are trained in epidemiology, many of my former students are now working in the pharmaceutical industry, working on pharmacoepidemiology and real-world evidence. So your training may not be in the pharmaceutical side of FDA, but if you've got epi and biostat skills, those are very marketable in terms of post-market surveillance and those particular areas of research. Also, have you thought about living internationally? Obviously, it depends on where you are in your career and your seniority, but academic institutions outside the US are very, very eager to hire folks who have the scientific training and the regulatory affairs training from the United States. So those are a few suggestions of areas that you might think about in terms of schools of public health, medical schools. Many clinical scholars want regulatory affairs training. So there are opportunities in the academic setting for people who have the skill sets coming out of FDA.
Thank you, Susan. I want to just pick up on one thing Susan said in particular to drive home, which is that it is amazing, especially in the food side of the world, how little people outside FDA understand FDA. And you don't have to have been a center director or an associate commissioner or a senior microbiologist or whatever senior positions we all held. If you've been at FDA a year, you know more about FDA than 99% of the people in the private food sector. And so, you know, take that with confidence, but think also about what it is that you know and how can you translate that. Okay, next on our list here, we're going to move to Jeremy Sharp.
Well, that's a great jumping off point for me. So as I said, my firm does consulting for organizations that are looking to influence policy. That means sometimes lobbying, but it also means stopping and thinking about helping someone think about what their agenda is, what the levers are they can pull, what are the parts of the government agency matters, what is the government agency going to ask them, and really jumping off of what Joe and Susan and others have said here is you will be shocked at how little anyone in the public policy space really understands FDA. You know, those of us who are at FDA always think, okay, we've got the guidances out there, we've got the regs, we've got our website, we put out a lot of information. Surely everybody understands exactly what we're thinking about and how we're thinking about this and why we're making the choices we do. And that's just not true. People read these things and they interpret their own rationales behind them. They are convinced that FDA is trying to do X or Y when really FDA is just trying to take the next step on something, right? And that is something that people who want to make good public health policy on food, on nutrition, on tobacco, want to have a better understanding of. And frequently the kinds of organizations that are on the more advocacy end of this, as opposed to the industry side of this, they don't have the resources to have that kind of expertise in-house all the time. And so they will do short-term, long-term, temporary projects with consultants and people who have experience. And that's what I do. And that's what my team does, is we help what I will call, for lack of a better term, do-gooder organizations think about their things. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations that don't have FDA experience kind of look at FDA and be like, well, why aren't they just doing this? This would be the easiest thing in the world. And they really need someone to be realistic with them to understand, no, the reason we have the food additives program the way it is because the food industry is enormously larger than the drug industry. And it has infinitely more products and has much more direct impact on the public's life. So that kind of insight that you would have coming out of the food centers, understanding that the CTP is standing itself up and just starting, even 10 years later, starting to get its thinking around regulatory process and science, is the kind of insight that organizations don't have and they haven't built inside. And so they need other people on the outside to help them think through that. And then the last thing I would say is that you've got those of you who, everyone in FDA is at heart a researcher. You have to spend your day learning something new, whether it's data, whether it's law, whether it's econ, you're figuring out something else and solving that and building that puzzle for people. And that is something that is in demand and will be even in demand in the metropolitan area of DC, even with all the changes going on here. So there are definitely opportunities for all of you coming out of FDA, I think.
Okay, thank you. Caitlin, you chose a food company.
I did. And I will echo everything that you've heard from others. I feel like there are days where the most valuable thing I'm bringing to the table is an understanding of the Administrative Procedures Act. So do not discount the value of just living and breathing FDA and understanding it. And one thing I wanted to hit on, because I've heard so many people when they leave FDA, the public health mission is what they miss the most. And I just want to stress that public health mission does not have to end with your departure from FDA. I think there are so many different ways to engage. One reason that I moved to industry was because I had seen, sitting beside FDA colleagues over the years, how valuable their experience in industry had been to bringing unique policy perspectives to the rulemaking and guidance development process. You know, how to meet the same public health goal while, you know, identifying something that would make the real difference in practical implementation. And sitting at FDA, I also saw how, you know, engaged, knowledgeable members of industry could have real dialogue with the agency and work through issues to achieve same public health goal in a way that would be workable. And so, that's a place that I wanted to build up my skill set, but also felt like I had immediate value to bring to an outside organization.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's terrific. Stuart, what would you add?
Just a couple of points. I think people shouldn't view the roles we're all talking about as siloed, that you can't just be doing one of these things. Susan talked about a broad reach of academic. I assume you could have some academic position and do some consulting on the side. Lots of us who went to law firms wind up teaching. I went to University of Virginia undergrad and law school. I give a lecture, an undergraduate lecture 3 times a year that I humorously call the history of food safety regulation from the Bible to the present. And the professor insists I do it in about 2 hours because I could go on for days, obviously, with that breadth of thing. But there are lots of ways to sort of build on the skills you have and put together sort of a couple of different things from a couple of different plates to give yourself a fulfilling post FDA life.
Thank you. I will make a short confession. When I was thinking of leaving for the FDA, one person I consulted was Stuart Pate. And I was thinking of all these different places. And one thing he said to me was, Joe, you have your skill set. You're probably going to do about the same kind of thing, regardless of where you go. So also pay attention to the culture at the places, the influence on where those places are. But, you are who you are, and you're probably going to do your thing wherever you end up. So, you're not necessarily locking yourself in to a particular role, depending on which sector you pick. You can also shape what you do. And let's see, is there anybody else who wants to contribute here? Peter, Deepti, want to jump in or move to the next one? I hear deferral. All right, let's move to number 3. This was probably the most popular one. If you were in an interview selling your experience and expertise gained at the FDA, what would you highlight and how? Let's face it, everybody on this call is either looking for a job or thinking about looking for a job, thinking about those interviews and saying, this other stuff is nice, but now tell me exactly what should I be doing? Susan, we'll lead off with you.
Thanks, Joe. And I'll confess that some of my thoughts on this have been informed by some great posts on LinkedIn. People have been saying, like, why hire a Fed, and go through all the laundry list of why you should hire a Fed. And that reflects my own list. So a few things. The ability to really be scientifically rigorous in support of a mission. FDA science has to be so rigorous for things like Information Quality Act. The ability to work respectfully in an environment, listening to all different stakeholders, whether it be industry, consumer groups, different points of view. You learn that at FDA, to respect all different viewpoints, and you learn how to communicate with your colleagues respectfully. Things like FOIA mean that you don't put things in an email that don't belong in an email, so respect. Transparency, being as transparent as you can, is so critical. Judgment and responsibility. Many of you have been working with market moving information, but you know how to handle that information and do it responsibly. Teamwork. Everything at FDA is done in teamworks, and so benefiting from diverse areas of expertise, critically important. Procedures, following, Caitlin said, the Administrative Procedures Act, how to navigate to do things the right way so that you don't have problems down the road. Information security. If you have a security clearance, highlight that. You have been vetted and are a trusted individual, so I would highlight that as well. And just your ability to manage a large scope, scale, and complexity of work. All of those, I think, are very, very relevant to hiring in any particular sector. The skills that FDA and feds have, if you don't want to take notes, go look it up on LinkedIn. Why hire a Fed?
Yes, it was a wonderful post. I saw that. Thank you, Susan. Caitlin.
Yeah, so I think it's really critical to frame how your FDA experience can contribute to the future employer. Do your research, understand what business problems they're confronting, and then help paint a picture for them for how your perspectives and skill set can help. So, if you're interviewing in the private sector, I think it's particularly important to walk them through with examples how your background is directly applicable to their business needs. It's far easier for business to go hire someone from another firm who has similar background as the person hiring, whose past experiences and past job title is like directly transferable, particularly for more mid-level and senior roles. I think that's the case. So, go back to those specific examples. Think about, could your background in food safety help them make decisions on how to prioritize their food safety risks and investments, because they're having to make those decisions every day. If you have a communications background, walk them through how you've dealt with thorny communications issues in the past and how that could help communicate the public on thorny issues they're grappling with. I think it will require a little more hand-holding with the interviewers in some cases, and being as specific as possible will really help you.
Thank you, Kayla. I want to drill down on something before we move on to Stuart. And that is, when you're on the interviewee side of the table, all you're thinking is be me, me. I can do this, I can do that, I can do this, I've done that, blah, 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 blah. When you're on the other side of the table, you say, that's nice, but why do you want to work here? And so Caitlin said, do your research. Do your research and map out for yourself, why do I want to work at this company? So let's just say Caitlin's interviewing at Mars. Write that out and then cross out Mars and put in another company's name and read it. And if it still makes sense, rip it up. Because that question is, why do you want to work for a food company? It's not, why do you want to work at Mars? So you have time, you're anxious, but use that anxiousness as fuel to really investigate the places you're interviewing and what about them you can help them with. Because they're much more interested in helping their company than helping you advance. Okay, Stuart.
So, look, Joe, let me pick up on that last point. If you're thinking about a law firm, for example, law firms share lots of characteristics. Anybody who's worked in a law firm could write down 5 or 6 things about their firm, and everybody else in a law firm would write down things that all sounded the same. But all law firms are not the same. And they have their own culture, their own perspective, their own rhythm, their own expectations. So you shouldn't assume that this is, one is just like another. But look, I think the most important skill that someone who spent time at FDA has is this. And I'll start by saying, the law and regulations because I'm a lawyer. But if you're a scientist, you know the science and the law and regulation. And what FDA people have is an uncanny ability to merge those sets of knowledge bases in ways that are can be most persuasive. Think about some event you had, some matter you were involved in, where external people were trying to persuade the agency. What did you find that was persuasive? What worked? I've read, God knows, I'm not even going to guess, thousands of comments in my career. And I can remember, sometimes when I was at FDA and sometimes since, I can remember some that were memorable because I thought they did a miserable job of making a good point. and those are more, you're more likely to remember those than the folks who had a layup and made it. But that's really an important skill. How do you take what you understand about where's FDA coming from, as a number of the folks in this webinar have said? What's going on here? What's the context in which this issue arises? How do I take the facts that I have and make them most useful? And if it's not a matter that involves a presentation to FDA, but maybe it's a client, or if you're in a food company like Caitlin, maybe it's a colleague has come to you and said, we have a problem. You have an ability to help unpack that problem and find a solution in ways that are compatible with the statute. And that in and of itself is a valuable skill.
Thank you. And we've all now got a new sound bite. Whatever you do, do not make a good point in a miserable way. Don't do a miserable job making a good point. If you got a good point, take the time to figure out how to make it clearly and convincingly.
Right. Yep.
Thank you, Stuart. I'm just losing my spot here. Jeremy.
I'll be quick because I think most of what I would have said has been said, but I will just double down on something. For better or for worse, most of the people in the private sector share many of the biases that the public broadly have about government, and that it is different from the way they operate, and they are a little bit skeptical of government employees, not in terms of quality or ability, but just like they're thinking, okay, my job's on the line. I got to hire this person who's got to be able to deliver for me and get these things done and operate in my crazy workplace, whatever it is. And can I count on this person? Or, as Caitlin said, do I go find someone who's kind of like me at another place who I can have a higher degree of knowledge of and can. And what I want to say to you is, you all actually worked in a place that was very much like the private sector. I think that this is a dramatically exaggerated viewpoint, and helping your interviewer understand that you worked in a matrixed environment. Yes, you had your line of authority that you were responsible to, but you were probably working across agencies, across offices, with collaborators. You were having to deal with different internal stakeholders who had different interests. They were all competing with one another. You had political hacks like me messing with your work, and you were having to figure out how to convince me to back off, or threaten me to back off, or just hide things from me, right? These are all management tools that you did somewhere in your day-to-day work. And I wouldn't do the hiding thing with an interviewer, but these are things that an interviewer can understand. And so if you go to the examples that Caitlin's talking about and link that to how it makes you effective at getting things done for them, whether it's a law firm, a consulting firm, a client, a business, they will all find the value in you and your experience at FDA, but they're gonna have to have those dots connected for them.
Excellent point. I didn't mention, many people know that I also worked in private law firm for a long time after I left FDA. And some of the companies I worked with, I tried to understand why they thought FDA was such a bureaucracy, because they are also. Nevertheless, the points that have been made is they all think the FDA is slow. People would ask me, what's the biggest difference? They think I'm going to say government's the good guys, industry's the bad guys. And that wasn't it at all. What I found was that in private sector, they think everything should move faster. They don't understand at FDA how many things you're doing at once. And so I would look for examples to bring to your interview of concrete things you did that were both speedy and successful, because they don't know that. And that's one of the biggest barriers you need to break through. If I hire this person, I can count on them to get this done because they've done it before. And you may take it for granted, but I would really urge you to think of those examples from your background.
Joe, can I add a word to that thought?
Yeah, please.
I think that's a really important point. What you have to do is show that you have taken ownership of a matter, because that's what the private sector is often looking for. I owned a problem and I precipitated an outcome, a resolution. And that's what companies are looking for. I got a problem, I got to solve it. There can't be a million reasons why it's going to take forever. And lots of people at FDA have experience in doing that, but that's not perceived by the private sector. I think I would make that point as you say, Joe.
Okay, excellent.
Can I follow
Any-
up that just a
Yeah,
little
please.
bit? Yeah, I'm just wondering, you know, is there an opportunity for folks who've worked in some of the emergency response settings? I mean, we've been through so many emergency responses to say, this is the problem that landed in my lap. This is what I did. You know, this is how we solved this. This is how I coordinated with other people, and this is the outcome, you know, because the regulatory process is slow, but at the same time, we have to deal with emergencies all the time, whether it be a train crash in Ohio, or COVID, or bird flu, or infant formula shortages, or you name it. We had to deal with emergencies all the time. And if you own some of that outbreak response, how did you do that speedily, where you don't have the same types of slowness built into the regulatory process?
Good, excellent point. Thank you. Anybody want to add? Okay, we'll move on to question number 4 for those who are keeping track. Do you see your experience and skills learned at the FDA being transferable to other sectors? Leading off is Peter Lorre.
Well, the simplest answer to this question is just plain yes, and then maybe some details. So I would say that the first thing that at least FDA compared to where I've been before and after FDA as a public interest group is a shared mission. It's the same objective of trying to advance the public health through regulatory policy and through science. So that part of it is very much the same. From a skills point of view, I find that I use basically the same skills on a day-to-day basis. I use the same scientific skills, my ability to read the literature, use SAS if it comes to that, engage in basic epidemiology. All of those things are really the same. I read GAO reports. I follow things in PubMed. I know how to read a journal article. These are the basic skills of science, and they turn out to be, at least the job that I did at FDA, pretty useful when I ended up in the public interest world. And then, of course, you have a knowledge of policy that is harder to get and very easily transferable over to the other side, and people have already touched on the APA and so forth. From an experience point of view, I point to 3 things. The first is you just have a kind of perspective on the way the agency thinks that you simply cannot have unless you've been there. I mean, I don't know how many times I've been in a meeting and I've said to somebody, this is what they will do. And that's when, like, everybody is gone who I ever knew, even just about, right? I can still predict what people will do because it's like the institution has its own mind, right? And it continues to function in the same way, even as the individuals disappear. So you understand that, you can predict it. That may be a little bit just less true in the present, but in general, that's pretty useful. So you have a perspective. Another is that you know how to think strategically. In my world, in the public interest world, people don't think as strategically as they might. There's a belief that there's a value to just sort of, as the phrase goes, get your stuff out there. And I think that does have value. But one of the things that can be helpful is to explain, well, this is the way this will land at FDA. This is the way somebody will react to this. This is the way, this is an unintended consequence that might come from you just getting your stuff out there. Be careful about that before you act. And then the final one, I think Susan actually touched on this, I think is very, very important. Without divulging any secrets about where I've been before or after, or experiences I might have had, coming to FDA was a treat, I have to say. I found people, almost invariably wonderful to work with. You get in a room with people. In my job, it was different people at every meeting, dealing with dozens and dozens of people. And the number of times that I had a problem with anybody, just fingers of one hand over an 8-year period. I just found that people really understood what it means to be collegial, pleasant, decent, respectful in the workplace. And that, changed me as a person. And it made me, when I got out, want to make the next organization be different too. So I do think in all those different dimensions, you definitely will find that what the skills you have will be useful, and those that you've acquired at FDA will make you more effective in the next job.
Thank you, Peter. This is a unique question because every panelist asked to speak to it. So sit back and learn, but I really like the way you teed that off, separating out skills from knowledge or experience. Most people think knowledge and experience as opposed to what are my skills, my analytical skills, my communication skills, my strategic skills. So I think that'll be a theme as we go through. Susan.
Yeah, so there's so many different places the skills are transferable into. And, we've spoken about academics, state and local government, industry, NGOs, nonprofits, consulting. And I'll add one more because I know we had a lot of communications folks who have been riffed at the FDA. And I'm seeing a rise in communicators who are trying to tell the story of science and why it matters. And whether it be, writing a Substack column and start getting it promoted on services like LinkedIn or other social media platforms. I think one of FDA's biggest vulnerabilities is we have not been as good as we need to be in telling the story of what FDA does. And that has hurt us in the current circumstances that we find ourselves in. So people who have the knowledge and can write compelling communications, recording videos, social media has become an extraordinarily powerful way to communicate. And we need more people like those skilled scientists and FDA communicators to be working through social media and leading some of that influence from this perspective. So I'd encourage you to look at some of those as additional opportunities to combine multiple things. You could be teaching a course, writing a Substack, doing a little consulting on the side, take those skills and utilize them.
Thank you. Deepti.
Thanks, Joe. I think Susan and Peter really touched on what I was planning to touch on, but what I will add and maybe even just reiterate is that there is so much one learns and develops at FDA, not just in terms of substance. Substance is incredibly important, but also in analytical and strategic thinking, working in multidisciplinary teams, understanding and conveying complex information in a clear and convincing way. Somebody mentioned this already, anticipating what may come next, seeing around corners, managing up and down, understanding how an organization has to explain decision-making internally, externally, what has to be done to maintain, a record of how the organization came to that decision, and so many more skills that are learned. And so what I would emphasize is, the substance is incredibly important, and people at FDA are truly subject matter experts. But don't give short shrift to the analytical and strategic and other skills that you've developed while you've been at the agency, because those skills are very important. And so the substance is highly transferable, of course, but so are those other skills. And while the specific setting and circumstance may feel different, those skills can be applied virtually elsewhere and will add tremendous value to the organization.
Thank you. Good points. Don Zink.
I hate that mute button. I would echo what the others have said, but also I want to emphasize, if you've spent any significant amount of time at FDA, you have an understanding of the mind of the agency, how the agency thinks, and it is not how the industry thinks. So each and every one of you could probably walk into an organization and help them better understand what they need to do to comply with FDA regulations. Everybody wants a creative way to comply with FDA regulations. Some of them are entirely too creative. But I like to tell people I have two kinds of clients: those who are in trouble with the FDA and would like to get out of trouble with the least damage, and those who don't want to be in trouble with the FDA. And in both cases, that very much involves communicating what the agency is likely to do in various scenarios. Certainly, the minute you leave the agency, you can no longer exactly predict what they're going to do, but you have a pretty good idea, and that's quite valuable.
Thank you. Stuart.
Just Don and Deepti captured my thoughts quite well, but I would say, one of the things I learned at FDA, and it's been invaluable since, is how to unpack a problem, a multidisciplinary problem, how to think about the law, the regulations, and the policies in the context of facts, which on Monday look different than they did on Friday, and on Wednesday look different than they did the day before, and how to keep integrating that. And that's really, when I've been interacting with clients, that's almost an everyday occurrence. The more you interact with the client, the more you learn. Clients don't always tell their lawyers everything at once. Some clients don't tell their lawyers everything ever. And so that skill that you had, that you learned working at the agency on how to listen to everybody in a meeting and pick up what were the important facts, how does that relate to the whole, and put that together, is an incredibly important skill in the private sector.
Thank you. Jeremy.
I think this has been well covered, so I'm going to let the next person say.
Okay. Thank you. Well, this part I think was really well covered. Somebody mentioned something that I just want to pick up on, and that is one thing you're also good at, skill, is collaboration. And I know in the private sector, there's always a lot about cross-functional teams. We need a cross-functional team. And at FDA, you're kind of used to that. That's kind of normal. And so don't undersell the fact that you know how to work collaboratively with others. Susan also mentioned something about state and local governments. And I somehow left off my initial FDA AAA list at the beginning, that one of the first things we did was put together a page of resources. And one of those are links to states and local governments that are actively recruiting former federal employees. So if you've not seen that, go to fdaaa.org and find it, because that's a resource that's meant for all the people on this call. Okay, we have 3 questions left, but as the Vine intervention works, fewer people wanted to speak to these questions. So I think with 20 minutes left, we are right on schedule. Question number 5. How did you leverage your FDA connections and networks when working for a new role? Caitlin is going to lead off.
Yeah, so your network is going to be incredibly valuable. I think the first thing I had to do was make sure I had the contact information for my network, because it was all in my FDA computer. So if you are still at FDA, make sure you take your address book with you. If that's no longer an option, I would say LinkedIn is going to become your best friend. For me, I had an idea that industry was high on my list, but I was also trying to keep my eyes wide open to opportunities across the board. And what I found as most valuable first step for my network was just helping me firm up my thinking on next steps. I set up a ton of informational interviews, not to ask, do you have a job, but just to say, what's your day-to-day? Where do you spend your time? What issues are filling your time? And, that helped me get a better sense of whether I could see myself in those roles. Would I be happy? What would be the pros and cons versus my last 12 years at FDA? Those interviews also really helped me understand and internalize that the things that were FDA's top priority list may not be the same top priorities for outside entities. And I think I was able to interview more successfully because I kind of treated that as some of that research I was talking about earlier. I had a better understanding of what would be top of mind for interviewers because I had already talked to a number of other people in similar roles and had heard, you know, X, Y, and Z are the top of my list this month. And the other thing that I did in my informational interviews was I ended every one with, who else should I be talking to? And more than likely, you will get 2 or 3 names and hopefully the email connecting you with other people who you may not know, but who are willing to help. Most people are willing to spend 15 to 30 minutes talking to you about their life. And those are really valuable perspectives. When it came to my specific position, because the internet job scraping world is so fast, I saw my interview come through on an email alert before anyone in my network even knew about it. I have a feeling the person that was the hiring manager got word that the position had posted from HR after it had already hit the internet, just because the software is so sophisticated now. So I actually found the job posting on LinkedIn, but it was my network that helped me confirm that that would be a good fit. So go back to your network throughout the process, say, I got this. What's your perspective? And, you know, even for things like, is this a good salary offer? Is this competitive? Your network can be really helpful. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Caitlin. I'm gonna go to Jeremy in a minute. Before I do, I want to come back to something Stuart said at the outset, which is that the FDA community is unique and considers it one large extended family. So do not be shy. The network will, you know, they may not have a job for you, but they will be happy to talk, to advise, to be a sounding board, and do not worry about, quote, bothering them. Let them decide if you're bothering them. But, you know, take the initiative. You developed a credential, and, you know, your network is your PR machine, and your resource space, and your security blanket all at the same time. So, Jeremy, how would you expand on that?
Sure. Just 2 quick things to really emphasize something that Caitlin said is like, ask questions of your network. Do not, even if you think you know the answer, make sure you are testing with the experts, because I think one of the things that I found most challenging was not being an expert, not being on top of stuff, not, you know, especially as I got further into my job search and was feeling more and more frustrated. So use that network to ask them questions, even ones that feel dumb to you, because that's not bad. The other thing is, especially for the parts of your network you want to use to elevate job, you know, you draw your attention to jobs that may not have come through the way Caitlin said. You need to probably refresh yourself with your network if your job search goes on for a long time, because the people helping you are very focused on you for that informational interview, maybe for a few days after, and then they're not going to think of you unless something crosses their desk that reminds them of you, because they've got their full-time job that they're doing. And so it is worthwhile to check back in with your network from time to time and do things, not excessively, but sufficiently so that you're back in their brain space when they're seeing those job opportunities come, or when somebody comes to them saying, I'm looking for someone to do X. Do you know anybody who's good? Oh yeah, Caitlin's fabulous. Let me send you Caitlin's resume, or let me send Caitlin to you, or whatever. So I think that's, you know, I in my job search, I often went through thinking that I would get more help than I did, and it was not fair of me to expect that. So it's you know, the job we have to do as job searchers is put ourselves out there even for our network and our friends and our allies.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Stuart.
Just a few quick points. be intentional, have a plan. Um, don't have a fixed plan, have a flexible plan. Um, internalize feedback. If you have, you networked and you got yourself an interview and it didn't pan out, think about why. Reach out to your network, reach out to some of us and say, here's what happened. Can you help me understand why this didn't play out the way I wanted it to play out? And then don't discount the role of serendipity. Um, being at the right place accidentally at the right time. Be prepared for that. If you're prepared, when serendipity shows up, you'll be in a good place.
Thank you, sir. And I just want to come back to something I think Caitlin, but the others all said too, Jeremy said, I know, is be curious and ask questions. I was always amazed when I was at the law firm that I could ask a first-year associate anything. They knew nothing, but I could ask them anything and they'll go find out. If you ask a seventh year associate something, they'll say, well, I don't know that. And I go find out. And they go, well, it's not what I do. Are you too old to learn something? When you were younger, you were more curious than you are now. But we all do that. We develop into our specializations. And so you're at a point you have to open that up again and be willing to look in any directions. Okay, question number 6.
So can I just add one
Yeah.
comment while you
Yeah.
do? You know, there's a saying that I actually heard from Jerome Adams the first time, who, as you may know, was one of our Surgeon Generals during one of those administrations, the Trump one. And the saying is that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And I think that's what you just heard from everybody. It's that intersection of preparation and opportunity. People don't just get lucky. They are ready for those opportunities to come their way and capitalize them. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about next steps.
Super. Question number 6. If you were lucky enough to have multiple options, what were the factors that help you decide what was the best fit for you? So this is a luxury. What will happen to some of you? Deep tea.
Thanks, Joe. You know, we touched on some of these themes earlier, so some of this will feel like a repeat. But you know, as part of your process, the job hunt or interview process, give thought not just to getting the job, but also to what it will be like when you get there in the months and the years ahead. You want it to be a good fit, and so does the organization that you will soon be joining. So, you know, in addition to considering the specific subject matters that will be your focus in your new role, also consider how your expertise and experience will be used, for what purpose, for which entities, what will be your specific role within the organization. In the case of a law firm or consulting practice, will you be joining an established practice with a healthy client roster? Or is the expectation that you will build that practice and client base? And which is the better fit for you? If you're building a practice, if that's something that you're an opportunity that you're you know, excited about, what type of support will you have? What are the organization's expectations, both short and long term? What does success look like? If it's an established practice or group, is there a clear space that you will fill? And do you know the other team members? Hopefully, you know, you will have some familiar faces there that will, you know, help you as you move into this next role. Or your expertise will be such that, you know, there is a very clear place for you to add value. What is the culture of the organization? Is it one in which you'll flourish, one that aligns with a lot of your previous expertise and experience? And I think what I'll emphasize at this point is really just echoing what others have just said, which is ask questions to your network about fit. Others have gone through, virtually the same thing, and I'm certain, especially if those others have come out of FDA, that they'll be willing to share thoughts with you about what was a good fit for them, what wasn't, what they wish they would have known beforehand, what an organization looks like. And as Stuart mentioned, in the case of law firms, there are a lot of kind of themes that are similar across firms. And so even if you're not joining the same firm or consulting practice, folks in your network will be able to help you better assess fit. And don't be afraid to ask questions, not just to your network, but also appropriately during the interview and job hunt process. As I said at the outset, your soon-to-be employer wants it to be a good fit too. And asking the right questions will reflect that understanding that you have about the importance of a good fit for both you and them.
Thank you. And if it isn't a good fit, you want to know.
Yeah, sooner rather than later.
Right, because as much as you want a job now, you don't want to go into a job and a month later go, God, what did I do? So it's to your advantage to be sure you're finding the right fit.
Joe, I'd like to make one quick point.
Please.
No one talked about. A lot of times a new job means you have to relocate. All I will say is that everybody's situation is different, but don't place too much emphasis on staying where you are now. I've, throughout my career, lived in 5 different states, all prompted by career moves. It was not the end of the world. My family didn't desert me. My teenage daughter didn't turn against me for life. And it even maybe made us better. So keep an open mind about relocating.
Excellent point, especially with so many people in Washington looking for jobs at the same time. Stuart, anything to add?
Yeah, just a few points. I thought both Don and DT's remarks on this question were spot on. I think you should also ask yourself questions. What am I good at? What makes me happy? What stimulates me? What do I want to be doing? If I get in my car to drive home at the end of the day, what experiences during that day might have made that a good day at work or a bad day? And try and match up to the extent you can your answers to those questions with what you can learn about your job opportunity. And the more you can match those things up, I think the better off you'll be.
Okay, thank you. Question 7, home stretch. If you had to do it all over again, what would you have done differently? Jeremy Sharp.
So I've had a lot of time to think about this because I had what I ultimately was finally a good search back in 2017 when I was turfed out. But it took me a while to find that landing space. And so a few things. The first thing is to know that it can take a while. Job searches take time. Employers take time to try to make sure they've got the right person. And you need to really mentally prepare yourself for that, as well as financially and other things. You've got to recognize that, while you finding a job is like your #1 priority in life, the recruiter who's trying to bring you in is probably trying to fill multiple positions, and the people who are in the interview process are running their day jobs. And so it is often has nothing to do with you, but the process will slow down, and that takes a mental toll. And especially it takes a toll as time goes on. The second thing I would say, it relates to that, and this all sort of goes back to Stuart's have a plan, but have a flexible plan. You need to push yourself, like, especially in this, Zoom age and Teams age that we live in, you need to push yourself to go out and network and have the conversations. And, if you're like me, maybe you're not, but if you're like me, you will find that that's actually really exhausting compared to the incredibly full schedule you had at FDA, where you're going from meeting to meeting to meeting and reviewing documents and doing whatever in between. it is a different kind of mental energy. It is truly wears on you. And so you both have to push yourself to go out, but you also have to listen to yourself to give yourself breaks, because the bottom line is, because it's a long process, you're probably not going to find a job by Tuesday. That's not the way this usually works, unless you have serendipity come in and sweep in and take you off your feet. The last thing I would say is really, and this sort of aligns with what's been said earlier, cast a wide net. Don't pigeonhole yourself. You come out of this, if you take anything away from this call, you probably have a dozen different really valuable skills and knowledge areas that will be valuable to somebody out there. And you may only be thinking about one slice of kind of jobs that might be available to you. And this is not just a real opportunity to be creative, but also it's a necessity to be creative, because there are so many people out there looking for work right now in our broad spaces that you need to be thinking about, well, what about this version of a job? That doesn't mean go away from your strengths or your abilities or what you like, but think they're just a variety of kinds of different roles that could be interesting. And so use that network and use any means at your disposal to really try to have a more creative list of the different kinds of opportunities that you've never thought of before. And I think that's where engaging with other people is particularly valuable. A good chunk of the reason my job search took as long as it did was because in my head, I was like, I'm going to go do policy for a pharmaceutical company because, gosh darn it, I'm done with public service. They've tossed me out, and I want to go make some money and have a nice lifestyle. Well, I couldn't land any of those jobs because I'm not the right person to do that job. I don't want to work for those companies. Other people do. They should get those jobs. You're going to find a better fit when you cast a wider net of what kind of things are opportunity. And that's what your network is really there for. The questioning that Caitlin was talking about, where you go and find out what different people do and how they feel about it. And I really think that is the key to a good job search. It's like having the plan and being ready is really important, but really going as broad as you can is really important.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you. Deepti, we've got 1 minute left. You get the last word.
I think Jeremy really covered it. That was truly fabulous. I think the only thing I'll emphasize and add is that there are many opportunities out there that might not come to mind immediately. And so when you're having those conversations, ask the second or third question, drill down further, get a better sense of how your colleagues and former colleagues are using the skills that they developed at FDA in those other spaces, and think about how you can do the same in areas or places that you might not have initially thought of. And I'll close by quoting Susan, or the quote that Susan said earlier, which is that luck is truly when preparation meets opportunity. And so you'll be prepared even more so by having those conversations and asking those questions. So when that opportunity presents itself, you're really ready to seize it.
Okay, thank you so much. On behalf of the FDA Alumni Association, I want to thank all of our panelists. If we were in a room, we would all give them a round of applause. We can't hear you, but we thank you for doing that. I also want to give a quick shout out to Elisa Bernstein, who's heading our Support FDA group. And the first thing she said was, let's get out there quick with webinars. So we got out there. We've got today, we've got tomorrow, we've got Thursday. We hope this is useful to everybody. Please go to fdaaa.org. Learn more about the association, find the resources, see what you need, and tell us what else you need. Thank you so very, very much. It is 5:30. We are ending on time.
Thank you, Joe.